Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it's my number 17 team in my 2026 NFL Deep Dive Series, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They come in as my highest ranked NFC South team. I believe this is the first division that I've finished, and it only took 17 up to number 17. Less than half the league, which speaks to just the lack of, I don't know if it's lack of talent, lack of upside that we're starting to see come out of this division, particularly with Tampa Bay, who has graded incredibly high over the last couple of years, but last year may have gotten a little exposed. You know, Todd Bowles somehow kept his job. They keep losing offensive coordinators, and maybe now they've lost one too many as the offense really struggled last year. Rumors of Baker Mayfield being injured, of course, rummaging through the online circles. Mike Evans gone to San Francisco. How they replace him with Emeka Egbuka, I guess, is the replacement. But who's that big-time player that's going to truly replace him? Emeka Egbuka was really hot and cold throughout his rookie season. The offensive line looks fine. Tristan Wirfs is always going to be great. The defensive side, the Todd Bowles defense, that's going to be the real deciding factor, is whether or not this guy even keeps his job or not. Not that high on Todd Bowles, but the defense can be really good with the Todd Bowles scheme. It's just a matter of getting all the right players in position and getting that out of them. Does Todd Bowles have that capability? I think that's very much undecided at this point. Personally, I'm not that high on Todd Bowles, and we'll start this with our coaching staff evaluations. So Todd Bowles, he comes in as my number 31 head coach, just slightly above Zach Taylor, who we already covered. I've never been a fan of Todd Bowles as a head coach. I think Todd Bowles as a defensive mind is well established. That's why he comes in as a tier 2, but he also is the only head coach who officially gives himself the title of coordinator as well. He is listed as the official defensive coordinator. You got Larry Foote, who has some sort of like associative position, I guess you can call it, as a coordinator. I always felt that he should have gone somewhere else. If you saw my winter preseason prediction videos, you saw that I was a big fan of Larry Foote getting a defensive coordinator job. Because at the end of the day, Todd Bowles' defense is actually usually pretty well coached. They're actually usually pretty good, and they're usually a very fun defense also to watch. They create a lot of the good highlights and all that. But Todd Bowles is the defensive coordinator. He gets the 3-4 base formation. A lot of pre-snap disguise, very blitz heavy, thus very press man heavy. Creates very huge reliances on the defense. It relies a lot on the front four, on the pass rushers getting home, because it does leave a lot of his defensive backs sitting back on an island. We saw it last year where there was actually a lot of success. We talked about Jamel Dean in the last episode for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jamel Dean had a huge year last year playing on this defense because he was able to really harness the press man blitz heavy style that was being run, and he was attacking the ball. He was attacking the wide receivers. Not a lot of double moves were happening because of this style of defense. It was working, at least for Jamel Dean. Now, it didn't work for a lot of long-term success. We'll talk about what we think of the offensive side and what went wrong there. But the thing with Todd Bowles is that the front seven emphasis on this defense is really key. And dialing in, getting Rueben, Bain to play opposite Yaya Diaby was a humongous pickup for them. That was the Laramie Tunsil fall of this draft, where teams are panicking and there's going to be a really great player that's going to drop in this draft to a team that had no shot of getting him the day before, that are going to get a great player. And Tampa fell into that fell into their lap there. And they've done a good job of building up that front seven. You've seen them invest a lot in that front seven. Talk about Yaya Diaby and Vita Vea. You got Chris Braswell, who they've put a second-round pick on. There's David Walker, who was injured all of last year. We're going to get a chance to look at him, went to a smaller school. Elijah Roberts, who has like that inside-out capabilities Kalijah Cansey, who they picked up, who hasn't really turned into the Aaron Donald that people demanded he became because he went to Pitt and he was an undersized interior defensive lineman. That was literally all they had in common. But there's still going to be opportunities for him as well. And they brought in Alex Anzalone at linebacker. They brought in Josiah Trotter in the draft to play linebacker as well. Completely rebuilt the linebacker room with the departures of Levante David and Devin Bush in the years prior. Servosia Dennis is back in his backup linebacker role, which is probably the best suited for him. They got Christian Rosenboom as well. So they really put a huge focus on the front seven this past offseason because that's where this defense really lives and dies. It has to create all this pressure, create these opportunities so that way everyone on the back end can play this very aggressive ball hawking style that creates turnovers and mass chaos for the offense and forces mistakes out of the quarterback. The big thing is the roaming safety that we see Antoine Winfield Jr. play, where he becomes almost an essential read for the quarterback as to where is Antoine Winfield playing. And that it does assist the offense in dictating perhaps what the rest of the defense is going to be doing. But they've added so many pieces in there, including Keionte Scott, who's going to be able to step up into maybe more of a slot role also. They got Tyke Smith, who can play a slot role and a safety and a box safety. They got these versatile pieces that can play in the slot, in the box, and maybe even a safety role, where then you get false pre-snap analysis from a quarterback that can lead to big plays. And they can use the roaming safety as a distraction as well as to where the pressure is going to be coming from. And Todd Bowles designs pressure at a really high level. One of the better ones, I think, as a defensive coordinator, that's tier 2 ranking. It is actually he is as close to tier 1 as someone in the tier 2. He's at the top of that tier 2 when it comes to this. And it's really what helps keep the teams that he's head coached alive for the most part. They get a lot of great pieces. They get a lot of great production. And now, with the departure of Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis the year before that, and Sean Murphy Bunting, I think 2 or 3 years before that, it's a complete rebuild really of what they have at the cornerback position with Zion McCullum and with, Jacob Parrish and Benjamin Morrison and now Keionte Scott. There's a lot of new young pieces in there that really need to get up to speed. And in order to help them, that front seven really needs to drive home the high pressure style that Todd Bowles likes to run. And I know I just spent a lot of time talking about how great Todd Bowles is, but being a good coordinator is not what a head coach is. And the problem with Todd Bowles is that it just seems like from the CEO perspective, he's turned out some really good offensive coordinators. Sure, Liam Cohen and Dave Canales immediately come to mind. But there's just been a lack of high-end success from Todd Bowles since he took over from Bruce Arians. It's sort of like they kept Todd Bowles because they didn't want to lose the defensive perspective, and they've gotten some good seasons out of Baker Mayfield. That's not going to be denied here. But there's just been a lot of questionable outcomes in so many of their games because of Todd Bowles' head coaching responsibilities. And at times it doesn't seem like the offense and the defense are working in true cohesion. And to me, that comes from just a lack of engagement in the offensive side of the ball, giving himself the defensive coordinator title as well, or simply not giving it up when he was promoted to head coach when Arians left. So that's always been a huge concern with Tampa, and then I think last year is when it really came to head there, where there was that collapse, and there was that offensive, the lack of offensive cohesion that they were used to for the last couple of years that yielded two relatively successful head coaching candidates, like I said, in Canales and Cohen. And you wonder how much attention he is truly paying to other aspects of the game, which is his responsibility. People talk about, oh, but he's not an offensive coach, not a defensive coach. We've talked about this in other videos throughout this series so far. And to me, I'm like, he's the head football coach. It's just because he's a, quote, defensive coach doesn't mean the offense is not his responsibility as well. At the end of the day, it all falls down on him. How he delegates the offensive responsibilities is up to him and what he's most comfortable with as a coach as to paying the most attention to. In Todd Bowles' case, it's the defense. Same thing it was with Mike Tomlin. Same thing for the offensive side that it is for Andy Reid and Sean Payton. Defense, with McDonald and Vrabel and DeMeco Ryans. But at the end of the day, if the offenses don't perform, you're not winning games. It doesn't matter that the defense is good. It doesn't matter that the defense performs well. Because your job is to win and for it to be a complete team performance in the ultimate team game. So Todd Bowles, for the fourth year in a row, has a different offensive coordinator, a different guy calling the offensive plays. And this time it's Zach Robinson coming over from the Atlanta Falcons last year, where Zach was in an eerily similar situation with Raheem Morris as the head coach, where he had all the rope to sort of hang himself to be successful. And what we did see was actually some success from the Atlanta offense. The lack of success at the quarterback position, I think, was inevitably his undoing, and then bringing in Kevin Stefanski just sort of washed him out. But he sort of gets another opportunity here with an established quarterback in Baker Mayfield, who we'll get to. But we saw the breakout season, finally, a true breakout season from Kyle Pitts. We saw Drake London have a really good season. We saw Bijan Robinson just dominate the NFL. So he understands if you give him some pieces, he's established that he can get those guys to perform at high levels. And I think that the offensive line Atlanta had was really beneficial to him. I think he gets something relatively similar here. I think Tampa does have a decent offensive line as well that we'll get to. And he's coming over with that wide zone offense, which with Bucky Irving and the addition of Kenneth Gainwell, we're going to see them really get a high amount of volume in terms of their usage. And it's the balanced play calling as well. I think we'll get to Baker Mayfield, like I said, but there is the rumor that he was injured, and that led to a lack of success. And they had a really good backfield that it didn't really get unlocked properly, I think, last year. And now with, they have Rachaad White left. They replaced him with Kenneth Gainwell. They still have Sean Tucker with Bucky Irving, completely healthy, hopefully. So we'll see how that balance really comes into play, because they drafted Ted Hurst, who I'm huge on. So they added a little bit of depth there to the wide receiver room, despite losing Mike Evans. They are definitely downgraded from what they were last year, but they added enough pieces there with Ted Hurst as almost the understudy to be the ultimate replacement for Mike Evans. Chris Godwin, you're hoping gets a full healthy year, and he gets Emeka Egbuka, who had an up and down season. It was a tale of two halves for him. Started the first 6 or so games of the year looking like he was a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, and then finished the rest of the year looking like he was a bottom 5 starter. So, trying to unlock what exactly he is in this offense. He's a different type of receiver than what Robinson had last year in Atlanta, where he was mostly dealing with bigger body guys. So that's where somebody, it's a different type of skill set that now he's getting. I think there's a little bit more variety, in all fairness, here in Tampa than what he had in Atlanta last year, though Atlanta had probably higher end talents. You're going to see a lot of pre-snap motion, which I think really works well when you have Egbuka and Chris Godwin in particular, who are versatile pieces, who can play in the slot, can play outside. Godwin can be a bigger slot. He can take the top off when he is healthy. You're hoping that he can get some healthy seasons here. It's been a long time since I think we could all consider Chris Godwin to be a healthy option. And having that many people, it opens up to be for the spread formation, to really stretch out the opposing defense horizontally, which opens up opportunities for guys like Emeka Egbuka, or Chris Godwin if you want to play him in the slot, or Keionte, who you can split out into like the bigger slot, wide tight end position. And it also spreads them out, gets them smaller on the defensive side, which is just going to open up running opportunities for Bucky Irving and Kenneth Gainwell, and a little bit of Sean Tucker in there also. The issue with Zach Robinson was that the Atlanta offense last year in particular was incredibly predictable. You kind of knew based on the situation and maybe the personnel that they had on the field at the time, pretty much exactly what they were going to do. Now, being predictable isn't always bad, because sometimes you're in a situation where you do something that is incredibly predictable, but it's the right thing to do. The one thing you don't want to be is predictable on first down. And there was a lot of predictability with Zach Robinson in Atlanta last year on first down in particular. Second and shorts were also incredibly predictable. And those are some really key downs and key moments in the drive, the very beginning of the drive, and those short yardage situations in the middle of the down count, that you want to have that variety. You don't want to come out and sort of rest on your laurels and have like a very stringent, strict game plan for those scenarios. You want to have a variety of different play calls that can work in those scenarios, that make sense, that are suited for that situation, but aren't just the same old. And I think that was ultimately why, with all that talent, the Atlanta offense would struggle above anything else, is because of how predictable they were. And throughout games, you saw defensive coordinators really start to pick up on things. And you had the really good defensive coordinators, ironically, like Todd Bowles, who would pick up on it during the week, and then Atlanta would really struggle during some of those drives in particular. So you want to see Zach Robinson get more into being a more diverse play caller, because now he really does have probably the best quarterback talent that he had as an offensive coach in Baker Mayfield. I would say inarguably with this much power in terms of calling the offense. And Baker is capable of doing so many things. And you have a Emeka Egbuka, like we talked about, capable of doing so many things. Chris Godwin with the inside-out capabilities. Keionte can play inline tight end and can play that slot tight end. Create a little bit of mismatches there. The pre-snap motion can really open things up. The diversity of the running back room can really help as well. You got the young talents like McMillan and Ted Hurst, who we can mix in there in those spread formations. I would love to see him come out in second and short in a spread shotgun with 4 wide receivers. That's just not something that he would do. Now, you can argue that Atlanta didn't have the personnel to pull that off, which I think is fair. But sometimes you just have to create opportunities and understand why there's a reason why these guys made the football team, and you got to use them. You can't get into going back to another Atlanta coach like Arthur Smith, where you have wide receivers, but man, I got this tight end 3 that we really need to get involved in the red zone today type of crap. Zach Robinson, there is a degree where it's like, I have this wide receiver 3 in Jalen McMillan. Maybe I have to have some packages here to get him the ball, get him some confidence. What's his best skill set? Let's come out. Let's make this drive about him and see if we can maybe pick something apart here. Get some window dressing. Get the defense thinking about other guys and really focus on him. I would love to see drives go down like that for Zach Robinson this upcoming season, because this really is a second opportunity for him. Like, Todd Bowles must have seen something in that Atlanta offense last season, playing against them twice, that he really wanted to bring over, that had idiosyncrasies to them, that hopefully, being the head coach of the team, and like we talked about, paying attention to the other side of the ball, maybe Todd Bowles steps in a little bit and goes, hey, what I noticed last year playing against you is that you did a lot of this and a lot of this and a lot of this in these situations. If you just do this now instead, that'll counteract a lot of the tendencies that we picked up on last season. So I think this marriage here is actually very, very positive for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. to get a guy in that you were literally dueling against each other twice a year last year in some really important games just less than a year ago. So now to get together, even Zach Robinson now can be able to maybe exchange some things with Todd Bowles about his tendencies that they picked up on. So there's a lot of sharing here, and there's a huge opportunity for everyone to get better in the process. It really is just a matter of how much Todd Bowles is going to embrace that aspect and how much he's going to let in the other coaches and let in Zach Robinson and push himself and push some of the things in his knowledge and get involved more with the offense to help Zach Robinson succeed, and not just sort of sit back and let Zach Robinson, live or die based on his own play calls and decision making from week to week. So it's a huge potential for what they could do and how if they can at least be a completely efficient football team on both sides of the ball by embracing each other and helping each other out each and every week. Subscribe to the channel, everybody, so you don't miss any of the future videos. We are now exactly one half of the way through with this number 17 team. 16 more to go, the other top half of the league. And we're going to go with the player evaluations here for Tampa Bay, starting with the quarterback. And it's Baker Mayfield coming in. He is my number 12 quarterback coming into this season. It was a weird year for him last year. He's had a ton of success since coming to Tampa and taking over for Tom Brady when he did. Him and Todd Bowles sort of at the hip with each other since that transition. And last year was indisputably his worst year as the Tampa starting quarterback. And there is, again, I haven't seen anything truly confirmed about what his health situation was last year, but there was a lot of talk about him being hurt, him not being 100%, and it would explain a lot, because I don't think Baker's the type of guy where if he's hurt but incapable of actually putting on the pads, would sit out and would lead on that he maybe had to sit out. He would fight through it. He's got that competitive nature to him and that leadership quality to him that I don't think he gets enough credit for. But simultaneously, it feels like he was definitely hurt. And you look at some of the output that he had compared to the other quarterbacks, the adjusted completion percentage being 23rd of 26th, the turnover-worthy plays being 24th out of 26, the intermediate areas at 11 to 19 yards, he was 25th of 28. He wasn't getting pressured at his own fault. He was 7th out of that, but he was releasing the ball, sort of avoiding getting any type of contact, especially towards the end of the year. He was 23rd of 25 quarterbacks when getting blitzed, 17th of 26 when he was under pressure. So there was a little bit more trepidation than what we're used to with Baker Mayfield, who's got this like stone face. I'm going to stand in the pocket. I'm going to take this lick and I'm going to step into this throw regardless of what happens. There seems to be a lot less of that coming, and I think teams picked up on it. They went to apply a lot more pressure to the offense and to Baker. So I'm almost going to just assume that the bottom tier starter that he was there for a long time last year was due to that, and that he's more likely going to get back to what he was those first 2 years with the Bucs, which was that like top 12, top 8-ish quarterback, like hovering around that top 10, 8 to 12 best quarterback in the league area, where he was executing really well. He was doing really great with the pre-snap reads and pre-snap adjustments. You saw him directing traffic a lot and doing it quite well. You saw him pointing out guys and shifting the offensive line in just the right way. Getting the running backs involved, knowing when to check down, knowing when to hold it for a second longer and push that ball down the field for the big time play to a Mike Evans or to a Chris Godwin. You saw how great him and Emeka Egbuka worked out early in that season, where it looked like they were the next great, like, 1-2 punch in the league. It looked like the greatest draft pick ever. And he was finding Ibuka in all three levels of the field, and he was getting to that second and third read in the play, working through his progressions. You saw the head movement post snap, getting the ball out to the right spot, leading the receivers in just the right way. And then it just stopped. So the assumption is that when it stopped, it was the injury, and now he's back to where he was. So with the loss of Mike Evans, there is a downgrade definitely in the weaponry that he's going to be working with. You know, there's going to be a lot more of Jalen McMillan. There's going to be a lot more of someone like Ted Hurst, where the chemistry is just not built in the same way. And there's not that NFL level experience that Mike Evans had, that Mike Evans brought, where, you know, you're facing a particular zone, he's going to know where to sit just right. Where he can identify the man coverage and make the signal over to let him know that he's hot and stuff like that, having the confidence to do that. How quickly these younger players come about acquiring that trait is going to determine the level of overall success that Baker Mayfield as a quarterback is going to be able to have. Because he's got a good offensive line in front of him. They've invested very well in that group over the last five years, even before he was there. So he's really enjoying the fruits of that labor. And facing a highly aggressive defense, there are huge opportunities for him to get the ball back and to be on the field quite a bit. And then there's just understanding situational football a little bit. And we'll see how him and Zach Robinson work together on that, where you have this hyper-aggressive defense that's really putting their foot to the floor and running that gas tank out pretty quick. When are you pushing the ball down the field? How often are you going to push the ball down the field and potentially find yourself in those quick 3 and outs that's going to leave your defense vulnerable? Because you want to have, with that type of defense, you want to have longer sustaining drives. You want to have those moments where you're running that 9th, 10th play in the drive. So how much of your strategy is going to be, you know, this play is when I'm going to eat it, I'm not going to force it, you know, that gunslinger mentality that we see Baker get from time to time, because he was 8th in big time throws despite all the things that I've been talking about the roller coaster that was that last season. So when does he dial that down? When does he dial it up? When is it time to, like, we just run the ball here? Maybe I just switch sides. Maybe I adjust to a different run. Something like that. Rather than feeling that need to constantly attack the defense deep down the field, that is inevitably going to backfire. Because we saw that kind of be the case last year, where he wasn't executing well on the offensive side, and the defense was just running themselves ragged, trying to keep themselves in the game while running the strategy that Todd Bowles likes to run, and really what the defensive personnel was built around running. They're not a defense that's built around conservativeness, so the offense kind of has to find their balance in that. And I think that's another reason why you get Zach Robinson, as we said, is to sort of keep Baker Mayfield's head on the level. And doing that with very specific type of play calling to keep Baker from being an enemy of himself. Because that's the other thing about Baker Mayfield is he's had those moments where he's been his own worst enemy in games, where he's been a little bit too forceful, where he's been a little bit too aggressive at times, where it's not really all that necessary. And it's always been taking the good with the bad with Baker, because that aggressiveness has inevitably led to him having a lot of success. So you don't want to completely turn that tap off on him, but you need to figure out a way to make it more conducive to the overall strategy of the team and what you want to do as a team and as a unit against your opponent. Overall, though, I think Baker does have the capabilities to have huge statistical outputs because his skill set suits really any offensive scheme. He can run if you need him to. he can throw the ball with accuracy to all three levels. Going into the backups here, just a little quickly here, quick overview. Jake Browning comes over from Cincinnati and Minnesota. I think he took a dip into Minnesota last year. He, of course, had that epic run where he filled in for Joe Burrow and looked like an absolute world beater as a quarterback for a bit. I think he's a good backup. You're not afraid to use him need be. And then there's Jalen Daniels, quarterback coming over from Kansas. Very mobile, he's got like that incredible, like if you're just looking for a super athlete, I think it's him, but he's just got such a he's got head scratching decision making that is the reason why I think he went undrafted. But he's definitely a fun talent to have in there, and I'd like to see him maybe win out that emergency quarterback spot. I think it would just be fun to have him there. But Baker, I think, again, Baker good, 12th quarterback in the league. Now with the weapons, I got them 22nd to 27th in the league. It's a lot of like these tier 2, tier 3 guys that are filling out this group that there is a fear of a lack of true high-end upside here. As Chris Godwin, maybe he's not going to be any better than this now at this point with the injuries. Got some younger guys, Jalen McMillan. Could he develop into that? But it really is starting with Emeka Egbuka, who, like we talked about earlier, was truly the tale of two different receivers last year. Those first couple of games, that first third of the year, man, he was just an absolute animal. The versatility was great. Taking 60% from the outside, just under 40% from the slot, having that inside out capabilities, being able to move him around that I know Zach Robinson's really going to love doing this year. It was just phenomenal. And being a deep threat was such a huge component for him as well. He was running himself open, running great routes. That's the thing about these Ohio State wide receivers, is that they're incredibly disciplined route runners. That's like their main feature with them. It goes all the way back to Terry McLaurin and Michael Thomas, all the way through to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka this year. It's guys who they're incredibly fundamentally sound. They come out of their breaks really well. And they come out with the sure hands that you're hoping for. And then something happened. Call it Baker's injury. Call it just a collapse mentally. But the way he finished the year, you would think that he was just not good at all. Like, under no circumstances would a receiver who had this for the whole season be inevitably ranked as high as I got him. But the upside was so good. The top end was so good that the only assumption is that he's going to get back to that. Now that he can settle in, he can get everyone's healthy, settle in, and get back to that level that we saw. Because he was 29th of 32 receivers in drops percentage. He was 31st of 32nd in contested catch, when he didn't have any issues with that at the beginning of the year. He did finish 11th of 40 in deep down the field, but he was 76th of 81 eligible receivers in the short areas, 0 to 9 yards. Against man coverage, he was 28th of 29 eligible receivers against man. He was 9th against zone. The size aspect comes into play there, but that's where elite route running also can come into play, knowing where to sit, finding those gaps in the zone and knowing when to sit at the perfect time. So that really worked out. He was 36th of 70, so kind of smack dab in the middle there for slot receivers, which a majority of what he does is from the outside anyway, and I think that's where they really want him to live this upcoming season. 31st of 40 eligible receivers from behind the line of scrimmage, so those screen plays and all that did not do well with that. So there is aspects to his game that are actually quite concerning, especially because so much of what he did was early in the year. So it really speaks to how much he struggled at the end. 126 targets, only 63 catches on that. So 50% catch rate according to targets. Just under 1,000 yards with 938, 6 touchdowns. He's the big question mark. Will the real Emeka Egbuka please stand up? Right? I lean more towards the better version of him being the true Emeka Egbuka. So we'll see how they scheme him open and how Baker Mayfield is able to get him the ball. But there's also the complement of having Chris Godwin, who last year, again, 49 targets, 33 catches, only 360 yards, 2 touchdowns. The deep ball being his wheelhouse, he did not have enough targets for that. He did 46% of his snaps from out wide, 54 from the slot. So he's about a 50-50, very situational, very formation dependent on where he aligns. I expect that to remain the same. He's a versatile piece like that. But does he have the athleticism still? Or have the injuries been too much? That's the big question mark here. And the health. Can he be healthy all year? If he can't be healthy all year, then he's just a warm body taking up a spot, obviously. And it does lessen the overall capabilities of what this receiving group can be. It is really what the 22nd to 27th range exists in, is his health. If he's not healthy and he's not playing, then they're down at the 27. If he is healthy, they can get up to the 22 and have a chance to really exceed all that. But what we've seen with Godwin is a lot of this bigger slot capabilities, a lot of speed, a lot of top end speed, getting open quickly, winning at the line of scrimmage really quickly. Those drag routes, great. Deep crossers. But when you lose the athletic profile, that aspect of your game kind of has to go away, and it breaks it down to fundamentals. And he just doesn't seem to have grasped those fundamentals strongly enough to make up for what he'd be lacking in an injury situation. They got Jalen McMillan, who's your other outside wide receiver, competing with Ted Hurst. I think that's an open competition at this point. I was really high on Ted Hurst. I liked him coming out of Georgia State. Sort of a forgotten receiver at this point is Tez Johnson, because, the little slot guy, little skinny slot guy that you do a lot of the gadget plays with. And I think that Zach Robinson will find something for him in that. But then you got Keionte, who's just asking to break out. He's sort of been this middling tight end for a while, dropped off a bit last year. But we saw the success of Kyle Pitts. So we'll see if they're going to have a similar usage and similar scheming to get Keionte some success here. There's not a whole lot of competition behind him with the veteran Payne Durham. And then Bauer Sharp, who's just more of your tight end 3, maybe even tight end 4, depending on how that competition goes in the preseason, in training camp. Then you got Bucky Irving, who is just screaming for a true breakout season after a great rookie year. He's another one who kind of fell down a bit. We'll see how he's used in the receiving game. But how he's used in the actual running game, they come in as 15th to 18th in terms of their running back room, and that's Bucky Irving having a down year. Baker does contribute, like we talked about earlier, as a tier 4 quarterback threat in the run game. If he's healthy. If he's not healthy, then he's not a thing. But Bucky Irving comes in, and he, again, not the greatest season, not the healthiest year. Had 164 carries for 588 yards. That's 3.4 yards a carry. That is not good. Only 1 touchdown. He had a fumble. 403 of his yards were after contact. He did have 31 missed tackles, which is kind of an absurd amount considering the lack of carries he had. He only had 4 explosive runs. accounted for 27 first downs. Another guy who the lack of health seemed to be a deciding factor, because when he is healthy, he's got a plethora of variety to his game where he can hit those inside runs with some power. He can get to the outside with some speed. He can hit those cutback lanes with authority and decisiveness. And he can be a threat out of the backfield in the passing game. He can step up and pass block, pick up a blitz if they need him to, and make really smart decisions in that aspect. I think he showed all that in his rookie year. Didn't show a whole lot of any of that in his sophomore year. And Rachaad White, I think, really overperformed as well in support of him and in replacement of him in a lot of situations. And that's where Kenneth Gainwell comes into play here, who had just a phenomenal season last year with Pittsburgh. Really melded well with Aaron Rodgers. We'll see how he melds here in this offense, where he had 69 zone carries, 38 gap carries. He had 4.7 yards a carry, so a full yard more than what we saw out of Bucky Irving. 5 touchdowns. He had 363 yards after contact. He had 6 explosive runs. Now he's definitely into that more of a veteran, more of like a veteran position on this team. He's definitely going to be a backup here, but I think as a backup, he's got a lot of high-end capabilities where, unlike a lot of backups that you see in the NFL at the running back position, they're usually really good in the passing game or really good as just a straight-up runner and don't really have the capabilities of being a lateral move in terms of being a spell back for who the starter is, a more well-rounded starter. I think Kenneth Gainwell is a very well-rounded player. So he's going to have the capabilities to come in and be a true replacement level player, where we talked about Zach Robinson's predictability. It'll assist in being less predictable with what you're doing on the offensive side when the quote-unquote starter is off. So you have these guys who are relatively interchangeable situationally, so it opens up huge opportunities, and I think that is going to make things easier on Baker Mayfield. I think introducing more RPOs is going to make things easier for Baker and for this running attack, and the aspect of, like we talked about earlier, spreading it out, getting the spread formation out, kicking out Cade Otton into the slot and having just the 5 down linemen there on the inline to make the defense play smaller, playing the nickel, playing the dime, and then having this running attack, because both of these guys are sneaky powerful. I don't think Kenneth Gainwell gets enough credit for his power that he brings. He's not Derrick Henry or anything, but I think you don't really expect him to have as much as he does. And same thing with Bucky Irving. So they can outpower a lot of the smaller linebackers, the dime linebackers, and the smaller defensive fronts that can come out when those spread formations are put out there. And they're almost equally good receivers, where you can really get a defense playing small and then hit a screen pass or something like that, and then they're really at your mercy. You can have some really big plays off of that. So the running back room actually really works well with Zach Robinson and this offense and what they want to be this upcoming season. Now with the offensive line, it's really the tale of 2 different types of offensive lines here, because from a pass blocking perspective, they're 4th to 7th. And then from run blocking, they're 20th to 26th. And for an offense that wants to be incredibly balanced, the running blocking is a bit of a red flag. But they have so many good pieces in place, developing pieces, established pieces, that they could really galvanize something really great here. And we'll start with Tristan Wirfs at left tackle, who's had now a couple years there and has truly been one of the best offensive tackles in the league since he came into the league 2020, when he was a right tackle for that Super Bowl season. and then inevitably converted back to left, or converted to left. Where in pass blocking, last year was a bit of a downer for him. It wasn't his best performance. He did only allow 2 sacks. He had 474 snaps, but again, a lack of snaps, a lack of health coming into Tampa Bay's overall performances for a lot of their key players. He was 18th in pressures given up, 17th in hurries, 24th in hits. So despite the lack of play time, he was still, when he was out there, not performing at the highest level. Now, how much of his performances were when he was not healthy? I think that's the mystery of them all, and I would maybe more lean towards that because it really was an anomaly compared to what you're used to for him, which is a lot of top 5, top 7 performances in these categories. The run blocking, though, did not suffer. He was 3rd in gap, which was 53% of what they did last year when he was out there. 3rd out of all tackles, 54 qualifying tackles. Fantastic performance. And he was 13th when they would run zone. Now they're going to be much more of a wide zone offense this upcoming season, but he is such a phenomenal athlete. And that was really a big part of his profile when he came out of the University of Iowa, was the athletic profile of himself. To now get into a wide zone offense is actually quite beneficial. And I think we're going to see him take a huge step up in his run blocking abilities, where last year was one of his better years as a run blocker. And I expect him to take another step forward with this zone blocking, this wide zone blocking scheme. Really suits his style of play. But he does have the power aspect to him, and when he is at his best, he can match up against any of the best pass rushers in the league. He's a really good communicator with his guards and understands where to funnel a pass rusher need be, especially you get some of those bigger, more talented pass rushers, like the true tier 1 pass rushers, where maybe jousting with them and trying to overpower them isn't necessarily always the best path to take. We've seen Tristan Wirfs just take the smart route and understand where the quarterback is going to be, understand where the pocket is being shifted to, for example, understanding if they're running a bootleg or where the help is from the running back, for example, or from a tight end. And he'll just set up in a way in his pass pro where it just funnels the defender into the perfect location, where they just become completely inconsequential to the play. It's not even necessarily something that he did where he truly gets that punch or that point of attack. It's just letting the guy sort of run himself out of the play without having to do a whole lot, like work smarter, not harder type things. Like, it's really, really interesting to see him execute those things because he does have such significant size that when these guys in turn just attempt to flat out bull rush him, it just doesn't work. He's got such a great anchor, and his feet are so disciplined, and his hand movement, his punch is so disciplined that you can't really beat him with any type of strategy here at all. Then you move to his left, and that's probably the worst starter that you got, and that's Ben Bredeson, who's a decent pass blocker, but not a great run blocker. From a depth perspective, they have Justin School, who's a 3rd tackle, but could also play some guard if you need him to. You got Billy Schrauth, the rookie, who could be a sneaky guy to get some reps there as well. Luke Haggard and Dan Feeney, have a couple years on them there. Sort of just establish themselves as backups at this point. We'll see what that position looks like. I think Tristan Wirfs and Bredeson next to each other as pass protectors is a decent little combo. You got Graham Barton, another year at center, really getting used to the center position. He was a tackle in college, then he was like a guard for a little bit, and then they drafted him to be a center, so he kind of got thrown into this position. So he is, for a huge part, really just kind of learning the position as he goes. Not something that he played in college, I believe, at all. So we'll see how the new offense and the type of calls he needs to make, the pre-snap adjustments he needs to make for the offensive line, how much he leans on Baker to do that for him and how much he really takes over that responsibility. And understanding just where to slide to, in the pass pro. That's so much of what a center does, especially when facing the four-man rushes, is you're mostly just kind of sliding to one guard or the other with a high level of attention to stunts and blitzes coming into the A-gaps and who you help out. Because I think Mock and Bredesen are relatively equal in terms of their run blocking ability, pass blocking ability. I think Cody Mock's got a lot more upside at his period of time in the league now. I think his athleticism is something that's a little bit unlocked here at this point. So we'll see if he ever gets up to the level that I think myself and so many others have projected for him. And then on the other side of the it's Luke Gadecki, who has in the last couple of years really developed into like this real quality starter. He gave up no sacks last year. He was number 1 in quarterback hits allowed. So he actually did really, really well in that right tackle role last year. 14th in pressures given up. So he was giving up pressures considering his snap count. The run blocking was not as good as Tristan Wirfs, but he was a solid run protector as well. Maybe a little bit better last year than this year, but still in that range there where it's like you're a quality starter. Especially if they're going to run more zone, we'll see how he responds to that. He was not as good in zone blocking last year as he was in gap. And when going to the wide zone, we'll see how his fit is into that wide zone. But we've seen a lot of success from similar players like Caleb McGarry, for example, had a lot of success. Had a lot of success last year. We've seen a number of other tackles akin to him have a lot of success in this like wide zone Shanahan style, McVay style, call it what you want. So we'll see how they as a combination really work well together on either side and how they bookend the offensive line at the 2 tackle spots. But they really do need to improve in the run blocking because they want to be a more balanced team. And inevitably, the run blocking is a huge part of the running back's success. If they're not getting the blocks, they're not getting to the spots they need to get to, there's only so much a running back can do. And they don't have like that Saquon Barkley who's going to make a guy miss on the spot. So we'll see how they respond overall here. So overall, the offense is ranked 17th with a tier 4 offensive coaching. The passing offense is ranked 13th, actually, and the rushing offense is 18th. Got to see what that offensive line is going to do. If that offensive line really comes together nice in this wide zone blocking scheme, then they could have a ton of success in that as well. Now let's go over to the defensive side of the ball where Todd Bowles really needs to get this group going if he's going to keep his job. If they aren't good, then there's really no motivation to keep Todd Bowles around in this position. So this defense needs to get good. We'll start with the defensive line. So this defensive line comes in as the 7th to 10th best pass rush and 15th to 18th in run defense. A really good group. A really good overall group. A lot of balance here and a lot of depth. A lot of care has been taken into putting this group together, like we talked about a bit at the top there when talking about the coaching staff. Drafting properly, getting some young pieces in here, getting some variety of different bodies and whatnot. And it starts with Yaya Diaby, who for the last couple of years has developed and established himself as a really good edge number 1. Not quite in that elite tier, but very good. Very good, especially now with a true great partner on the other side. It's going to, I think, open up huge opportunities for him. Because he was for a while facing that thing that a number 1 edge guy faces where every tight end was chipping him. Every running back was chipping him. All the shifts and all the slants by the offensive line were to him. And now they're not going to really be able to do that. So we'll see how that furthers the breakout and furthers the development and furthers the production that Diaby can give you. Because last year he gave you 9 sacks. That was 19th out of 63. He was 14th in pressures, 8th in pass rush win percentage, 11th in hurries. So he had some high-level pass rush success last year, which it really does go under the radar just how good he's been the last couple seasons. Really does all the things right. Even in the running game, a decent stop percentage at 25th out of 51. Doesn't take a lot of penalties. He's not somebody who you can move around and put him anywhere. He is really, for the most part, just a outside the tackle edge guy. Though they did have him playing, the 4-eye tech. They did have him standing, in the three hole there, in the 3 tech for a couple of snaps. Nothing significant though. And if those plays were having success, you would have seen them do it a lot more. So it just wasn't a successful venture for them in the minimal amount of times that they did it, totaling 29 snaps outside of not being an outside edge player. But now with even more depth and more combinations there, and Todd Bowles is really coaching for his job, I believe. So Yaya Diaby's going to be a huge part of what this defense is going to be trying to do. It's going to be really about opening up opportunities for him and using these other bodies out there to in turn open up the opportunities as well. He's got good speed off the edge. He's got good hand placement. He could use a little bit more variety to what he does that's what really is what is preventing him from getting to that next level. And I feel like he's sort of peaked in terms of if this is all he's going to bring as a pass rusher in terms of pass rushing moves, in terms of his get off, in terms of his hand placement and his overall strategy when facing these opposing offensive tackles, then he has peaked, I feel. But there is a lot more based on his athletic profile that he can unlock if he just introduces a little bit more variety and takes a couple more chances out there. And with the way this defense goes about things, there's going to be those opportunities for him to take those opportunities, take those chances, and not just necessarily rest on his laurels of what he knows he's good at now and develop other aspects. Because I think he has developed some aspects to his game over the last couple of years. It's just about, getting himself to that next level. And when you have a partner now in rookie Rueben Bain, who, for all intents and purposes, dominated college football last year. He's got a little bit more size to him, and the University of Miami did use him a little bit more inside. And that will be interesting to see how the Bucs decide to use him. I think he's, at least here in his rookie year, they're going to use him in a bunch of different ways and a bunch of different techniques to just try and confuse things. While Diaby has sort of committed himself to being that guy, I think they're going to try a lot more variety here with Rueben Bain, while you have a true established number one quality guy in Diaby on the other side, and even lining them up together on the same side, and then throwing like someone like Chris Braswell on the other side, or Al-Qadim Muhammad on the other side, who we'll get to in a second. But he was really dominant. He was number one in quarterback hurries in college football last year, second in pressures. He had 10 sacks. That was 8th amongst 118 eligible edge players. He was 12th in pass rush win percentage. He was 8th in forced fumbles. He was 20th even in stops percentage, so he was contributing in the run game also. He just took a lot of penalties, and that's something that you got to clean up a bit. But having that bull in the china shop mentality was really beneficial for him. So we'll see how Todd Bowles embraces that in this type of a defense. The one thing that comes back about Rueben Bain is the lack of length. Now, he's got size, but there's the talk about having the short arms and maybe not having the greatest punch and stuff like that, and usage and understanding how to not get caught up in the lack of length, and how a more talented, more experienced tackle will combat him in games, knowing that that's the case about him. There is that red flag there. I'm sure that red flag is why he wasn't like a top 3 pick, and then the other stuff is why he fell even further. I don't know how to feel about the length issue. I certainly didn't punish him in his grade for it. Because until you see it actually become an issue at the pro level, it's just assumptions, right? It's just assumptions at this point. Can he find himself in a situation playing against the more experienced tackles where they will understand exactly how to beat him because of that length issue? Sure. How he counters that is going to be up to, number one, the coaching that he's going to receive from whoever the is assigned to him in that aspect. I have to go and look up the name there. But that's a huge responsibility to get him up to speed. And Todd Bowles, sprinkling in some of that knowledge there and understanding, okay, you lack length in this situation, so we're going to put you in this type of scenario, in this type of setup where that won't necessarily be an issue, where it won't hinder you. And then there's just getting him used to working around that lack of length and how he can make it a positive rather than making it a negative. Because as of right now, if he ran into somebody like Lane Johnson or Andrew Thomas or Christian Darrisaw or something like that, I wouldn't be all that worried about him. Because you're running into these high-level players who have all this experience, who would probably know how to really shut this whole thing down. So there is that aspect, but that's part of being a rookie and part of his development. I think the ceiling for Rueben Bain is to be like a true elite edge rusher in the NFL and a true balanced 3-down all-purpose edge guy in that, and also having the ability to kick inside like we saw him do just about 100 times for Miami last season, where he was playing in that 4-eye tech, where he was playing in the 3-tech, even got a couple of 1-tech reps there, handful of those. So we'll see if that works out. And in the event that it doesn't, then you just have two guys who just play solely off the edge. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having that. You just can find other guys that have different types of skill sets and capabilities to maybe move around a little bit more, which is why you bring in Al-Qadim Muhammad, who had a bit of a breakout season last year for Detroit, who comes in. He'll be your edge 3 here. Mostly just a pass rushing guy, but he's somebody that you can play, inside your initial edge players, who can maybe play a bit of an undersized 3-4 defensive end type role, almost be in with Keionte as sort of mirror images of each other to a large degree. I think Muhammad's got maybe a little bit more length, or at least the perception of such. And you got more traditional edge players, Chris Braswell, Anthony Nelson, who feels like he's been in the league forever. David Walker didn't get a real shot to play last year. A lot of people in the draft community really loved him, really loved the small school story coming for him. We'll see what a healthy season now, what is, for all intents and purposes, his new rookie season, what that looks like in a room that's incredibly crowded, where the opportunities are not going to be that high. We'll see how he approaches that. Definitely was going to have more opportunities last season if he had stayed healthy. So now it's kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit. And he talked about Keionte, like you said, just hasn't lived up to the completely unfair expectations that he had. He was completely overdrafted because of that comparison with Aaron Donald. God forbid you're an undersized defensive tackle at the University of Pitt. He's kind of performed at the level that I expected him to be at, that I felt like it was most likely result for him, which is just an undersized interior defensive lineman who doesn't have the high-end athleticism to play edge and just doesn't have the size and strength to play a true interior role. So he's kind of a player without a home here. Kind of has to decide, is he going to put on weight? Is he going to lose weight? Is he going to increase his athleticism? Is he going to just dive into the power aspect? He hasn't done either. So we'll see how that matches up in here with who else has come in, because Ashawn Robinson has come in. He's a giant space eater. And there's just a world where him and Vita Vea are on the field at the same time. Just plug the middle up and let's hope for the best here. Just try to do your best to collapse the pocket between the two monsters there in the middle and maybe free up a blitzer or something like that in the process. There's definitely a world where that's the case. They got DeMonte Capehart, the rookie, in there as well to sort of play that interior role. They have Elijah Roberts, who they drafted last year, who's got that inside-out capabilities as well. So he sort of falls into that same category with Keionte and Muhammad. So they have sort of these backups and these pairings for everyone out there. And with Vita Vea playing that nose tackle role, he's been one of the most consistently good, balanced, giant nose tackle types, where he had 4 sacks last year, but he was 7th in pressures. He was 12th in pass rush win percentage, 11th in quarterback hits, 4th in quarterback hurries. He was 13th in batted balls, so he wasn't just putting his head down and trying to just eat space and eat up a block and hoping for the best. He was using his eyes incredibly well. And that allows him to shed blocks properly when he is somehow in single manned up there on the offensive line. He did only take 118 A-gap snaps, which was quite surprising for me, that he lived as mostly a 3-tech last year with 576 B-gap snaps. Now, I know his athletic profile is really high, but to me, he's just somebody he's like another Dexter Lawrence, where you want him to play at least 50 to 60% of his snaps from that A-gap role, because you're just eating up space at that point. You're really eating up the initial line of quarterback vision with a great talent. And yeah, from an ego perspective, from a statistical output perspective, it's not nearly as sexy unless you just have like high levels output, the way we've seen Vea have, definitely the way we've seen Dexter Lawrence have. But it'll be interesting to see what they do this year with a guy like Keionte, who's a little undersized, Muhammad, who's a little undersized, not quite an edge, not quite an interior guy, Elijah Roberts, same sort of story. We'll see how these guys get rolled out. And I love the idea of him and Na'Shawn Robinson next to each other, because Vita Vea has that unique aspect where he's built like this 350-pound nose tackle who in any other era would just be a giant body who at the snap of the ball just kind of moves forward and just drives his feet forward and doesn't really have a purpose other than eating up 2 blockers at once to free up somebody else. Vita Vea has that athleticism of that 3-tech mixed in with the body of that gigantic nose tackle. So it makes him a very unique talent. And you almost don't want to pigeonhole him into that role. But I do think the lack of him playing in that position last year is not a good sign. If you're going to do it, I would like to, if you're going to have 761 snaps, I'd like to see 300 of those as an A-gap player. I think that just makes things better for the entire defensive line in general. And it'll open up more opportunities for an aggressive defensive strategy, I think. It'll free up some runners and all that. And it'll be a real great usage of him. And still allow him to use athleticism in other situations when you want to maybe get into more of an under or over set. Run some stunts with him, crashing into the B gap or the C gap, for example, and really being a confusing aspect, getting these great matchup opportunities against linemen that just aren't expected or used to being up against the guys his size and his athleticism. So overall, a very good group, a very deep group. And it's one that it's very obvious that the defensive coach built this specifically for what his strategy is on the defensive side of the ball. And the head coach embracing the defensive aspect of his team here, because there was a tremendous focus put on this in this offseason in particular with the additions they've made the last 2 years. Now with the linebackers, this is a completely rebuilt linebacker room. And they rebuilt it with 2 players who are like mirror opposites of each other. With Alex Anzalone, the free agency signing from Detroit, and Josiah Trotter, the rookie from Mizzou. Again, they still have Christian Roseboom there. They still have Servosia Dennis there, who are going to be nice rotational pieces for them. But the linebacking group comes in 18th to 20th in coverage, 17th to 18th in run defense. So it's a top 20 group. It's a balanced group. You kind of know what you're going to get from them in both aspects. But one linebacker is going to give you a little bit more than another in different aspects. And Alex Anzalone is going to be that that cover linebacker for you. Where last year with Detroit, he had 68 tackles. He was targeted 61 times, only gave up 40 catches. That was the second best completion percentage amongst linebackers last year. He was 10th in passer rating allowed, 7th in pass breakups. He was 35th of 52 in man coverage, but 13th of 52 in zone coverage. And you guys know, if you've watched other videos of my talking about linebackers when it comes to coverage, I can't hammer it home enough. The zone coverage abilities of a linebacker is so much more important than the man cover. Because so much of what they're doing is playing that spy, that man, that hook zone area, where having that athleticism, awareness, and anticipation is so much more important than what they do in man coverage, which is they're lined up in front of a running back and then they're just sprinting to one of the sidelines, just trying to cut the angle off for the running back on a screen pass, for example, or on a swing pass, or lining up with a tight end and stuff like that, where they're just not, where you're coming into coverage late because you have to read to make sure it's not a run, and then you're entering the man coverage late with the tight end, so it doesn't really work out all that well. It puts you in a bad spot, so you almost don't want to have that. But when you are put in that situation, you kind of have to play with more anticipation. You have to understand the situation a lot better. But I think Anzalone has developed that really nice aspect to himself in coverage where he's really nice and settled there. He wasn't great in run defense last season. Has sort of not been the greatest run defending linebacker. He's sort of just been a great athlete linebacker going back to his time in New Orleans before having the breakout that he had with the Detroit Lions. But he was a sure tackler last year. He was 9th of 59th in missed tackle percentage. 37th of 58 in stops percentage. That's not all that great. So we sort of know where he lives as a linebacker, as a veteran presence. I think he's a good plug-and-play linebacker here while you develop a guy who you hope inevitably becomes your number one linebacker, your linebacker one, the next Lavonte David in the line of linebackers that have been so great for Tampa going back over 20 years. And that's Josiah Trotter, the younger brother of Jeremiah Trotter Jr., the younger son of Jeremiah Trotter Sr., the former linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles, great linebacker, producing linebackers in his bloodline. And Josiah's sort of the opposite. He's not coming in as this great cover guy. You know, he doesn't get a lot of great coverage reps from what I saw. And he was graded as 105th out of 113 linebackers in zone coverage, which is horrific. So not a guy you're going to put out there in coverage. He's that guy that's that straight ahead, gap discipline, run defending linebacker, playing super aggressive, trying to be hard hitting, all that. He was 13th of 107 linebackers last year in stops percentage. So you see the contrast there from what we just talked about with Anzalone. The thing is, the difference between someone like Anzalone and Trotter is Anzalone's been in the league so long, he is what he is. Josiah Trotter coming in with such a great foundation and baseline for run defense makes him an immediate impact player as a linebacker. Now, what you do with the coverage skills all comes with how you scheme him up and how you coach him up and showing him different ways that he wasn't seeing in college, for example, and with how aggressive you play on the defensive side of the ball with blitzing and all that, it does open up him to play more instinctually, embrace the instincts a little bit more in pass coverage in those zones, understanding where in certain scenarios through high levels of communication with someone like Anzalone as a partner will teach him to put himself in more advantageous situations when in pass coverage, when that's the expectation of him. But I'm not worried about him in run defense at all. I think he comes in solid baseline for that. I think in just obvious passing situations, he probably comes off the field. Anzalone stays on, or maybe Tyke Smith takes over the dime linebacker role, something like that. But a really good turnaround for this linebacking group that I didn't grade that high last year. I think I was right in doing so despite the backlash, especially with the Lavonte David stuff. Now Servosia Dennis falls right back into the role he's probably supposed to be in, which is like a rotational early down linebacker, when they get into those bigger sets. Roseboom, I think, has a little bit more potential there, even though I don't grade him as high as Servosia Dennis. But a really good 1-2 punch. I'd be quite happy with this being the group I'd come into when you have that strong front defensive line in front of them. Having this variety, having this aspect where you have a good cover guy and you have a really good run defender, being able to meld them together, I think is going to be real good for them this upcoming season, and real good it's a good combination with what they have going on up front, especially when you have the amount of size potential with Vita Vea and Ashawn Robinson playing together on that defensive line, really eating up that space. It's going to open up huge opportunities for Trotter to really excel in the run game as well. Now with the defensive backs, and I got them sort of right in the middle of the pack. 16th to 19th. So like fringe middle of the field, sort of just barely in the back half. And that's because of the amount of turnover and the amount of young bodies they now have to rely on here. They got Zion McCollum, who was sort of the cornerback equivalent to what we saw with Emeka Egbuka last year, where the season started those first couple games and you're like, is Zion McCollum an elite corner? Is he actually an elite corner? Because he is just playing out of this world right now. And then he sort of came back down to earth throughout the year. Jamel Dean maintained the high level play, and McCollum just kind of settled back into being like corner 2. And now he's being put in a position where he's expected to be corner 1. He's taken that responsibility. Now, will Todd Bowles do a thing where it's just one corner gets one side of the field, the other one gets the other, and you don't move, and there's no following guys around, there's no trailing top wide receivers, there's no playing specific matchups, it's just one position, that's what you do? I think there's a real possibility that that's what's going to happen. And I think that's probably in the best interest of McCollum and Morrison and Parrish and their development this year. Because you don't want to overcomplicate it for them. You're giving a lot of responsibility to really young guys who don't have like that high-end experience or like the true pedigree of being a top corner like McCollum, who inevitably finished 48th of 74 in man coverage, 41st in zone. He was 25th in completion percentage allowed, so that was a pretty good output. Right in the middle there, 38th in forced incompletions. He did give up 5 touchdowns, so that was 52nd in the league out of all corners. He only had 1 interception. Did have 6 pass breakups, put him right in the middle. And then he was on sort of the bottom half in passer rating allowed when targeted, 43rd of 74. I do like that he only had 1 penalty. Now, I say that and then simultaneously go, well, maybe he should have been playing a little bit more aggressive than at the point of attack and taken a couple more penalties if it meant just adding a level of aggression to his game. Because when you have what you have going on in front of you, highly aggressive blitzing, pressure-oriented defensive front 7, offenses are not going to have these long, drawn-out route combinations. And if they do, it's going to be incredibly rare. Because they're just not going to have the time for these receivers to run these routes. Not with you playing the press on the outside and all that. So one thing I'd like to see from Zion McCollum that I think we saw early in the season and then it kind of just went away for whatever reason was a lot more aggressive instinctual play. A lot more strength at the point of attack. A lot better ball skills when the ball's in the air. I'd like to see that come into fruition a little bit more for McCollum. And then it's just a wide open competition for all the other corner spots with Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame, who fell in the draft because of some injury concerns. We'll see if that bounced back this year completely healthy, what he can do. Jacob Parrish comes in a little bit better in run support, not as good in coverage as Morrison. We'll see how that competition can maybe work out. They brought in Keionte Scott from the University of Miami, who I feel is just mostly going to be a slot guy as well. Maybe they end up getting him to play a little bit of safety also, be a third safety. I think there's a possibility of that. His run defense is so good coming out of Miami that I do feel like if you have Morrison on the outside, playing Keionte Scott as your slot corner really helps solidify your run defense, even when you're playing smaller. So I do like him over Jacob Parrish to start. We'll see again how that competition works out. But then you get into the safety room, and we talked about the roaming safeties. Tyke Smith, good cover guy, good run defense. He's going to be somebody who can play in the slot. He's going to play some box safety. He'll play a little bit of free safety, but not nearly as much as what we'll see out of Antoine Winfield Jr., who is really solidified as one of the better safeties in the leagues. Really was that from the moment he came in. Gets an 89 grading coverage for me, a C in running, so a positive output in run defense. And will play either deep safety most of the time, but then also come up about a third of the time and play that box safety role when they want to get a little more aggressive or get maybe some press on some tight ends or maybe double a slot early, sort of throw off that routing. Because he did have 74 tackles, so he's a great tackler. He was 27th in completion percentage allowed out of 26, so he's the upper half of the league in that. 7th in forced incompletions, top 10. Gave up 2 touchdowns, that was 18th. 2 interceptions, that was 14th. 6 pass breakups, that was 4th amongst safeties. And he was 23rd in passer rating allowed out of 66 safeties, so the upper third of the league there. So just overall, he's just really well-balanced performances. I like him the same way I like someone like Jesse Bates, where he can be that traditional safety. He can be a ball hawk. He can get sideline to sideline. Sneaky speed, sneaky athleticism, really good ball skills. But if you need to get a physical play out of him, he does have almost an old school mentality to him. I guess that comes from being a second generation guy. And being able to step up into the box and play big and play aggressive is a great little asset for them to have. Now, the problem is that when you have the level of redundancy that they have to a large degree here, like we talked about with Tyke Smith and Keionte Scott, throw in like Josh Hayes, Chase Lucas, Miles Killebrew, the depth guys, it is going to make him resort more to being just a free safety and being that roaming safety in the back. Sort of identifying, okay, where's the majority of the routes being run to, what's the offense trying to accomplish, and sort of working himself over the top there and trying to make plays deep down the field more than anything else. But overall, it is a group that he's going to be able to help now because you have the inexperience of Benjamin Morrison and Jacob Parrish, where now Antoine Winfield can actually help them out over the top, and you just hope that Zion McCollum, if he can develop into that true number one corner, that you can sort of plug and play him on one side, sort of leave him there on an island by himself and hope you get some great success out of him and focus more on helping out these younger, less talented, for the lack of a better term, players that you got. But a good defensive back room. So overall, the defense comes in at 11th overall. Tier 2 defensive coaching. Pass defense 13th, rush defense 11th, really balanced defense. A good, solid front four leading the way. And then an incredibly serviceable and high upside linebacking group and defensive back group. Now we get to the schedule, and they have .491 strength of schedule, which is the 21st strength of schedule, in terms of strength of schedule, with an 8.5 Vegas over-under. And I have them as a push. Just assessing the schedule here, I got 4 wins for them, pretty much guaranteed, all home games. Cleveland and Minnesota there early, and I like the Carolina, New Orleans games at home, drawing those home games. Then for the rest of the schedule, it's like, okay, you get Cincinnati early in the year, which is usually a big win, but you're on the road. You get Green Bay, you're at Dallas, Pittsburgh, you're at Chicago, you're at Detroit, you're at Baltimore. You got the Rams in there, you got the Chargers in there. Luckily, you drew them both at home, so it's a little bit better. But there's a lot of question marks here. So, I mean, best case scenario, I got them 14-3. Just can run through these teams if they're playing at their best. But worst case scenario, they're 4-13. So there's a humongous range here for what this team could be. And I got them really, my true prediction is 9-8. Just because the volatility here, which makes it a push for me in terms of the 8.5. Because you're like, man, drawing Cincinnati early but on the road sucks. You wish you got Dallas at home. You wish you got Chicago at home. Man, it's almost like getting the Rams at home is sort of inconsequential because you're just not quite at their level. You know, how are you going to match up truly against your division? You know, I like them, again, Carolina, New Orleans when you get at home, but then Carolina, New Orleans, and Atlanta when you get them particularly on the road. What is that going to look like? You also get Atlanta. You don't get Atlanta early, truly early in the year. You get them midway through the year and then right there at the end. Where by then do they have the quarterback position figured out, right? How's the defense sort of come together by then? Have they figured that part out? Has Jeff Ulbrich really gotten his work together? So there's a lot of factors in that. And then getting New Orleans late in the year. Though I do like the home matchup a lot better than the away one. The away one, you're still like, man, that New Orleans one can go either way that late in the year. As they've sort of gotten their feet underneath them, as guys have gotten healthy, as the offensive lines work together. So there is some concern about some of these matchups even late in the year. So it's a volatile schedule. It's not as easy as you would think based on the strength of schedule aspect. That bye week right in the middle of the year, that's going to be a huge assessor because you do get your 3 hardest games after the bye week, at least on paper, with Detroit, Baltimore, the Rams. I would throw in the Chargers there as well. So if you can get off to a hot start and get into the bye week, let's call it 6-3 going into your bye week, then I think you're in really good shape coming out of it. If you're 4-5, it could be trouble coming out of the bye week there in the second half of the year. So overall, they are my 17th ranked team, 17th offense, 11th defense with the 31st ranked head coach. Does punish them a little bit. And there you have it, my number 17 team in my 2026 Deep Dive series. Make sure to subscribe and like this video. Helps with the algorithms, helps my channel grow, and gets me out to more people. Leave in the comment section below what you think of Tampa Bay not only being my highest rated NFC South team, but it happening seemingly so early in the power rankings. Can't wait to see the discourse, and I will see you guys with the next video next time. We're halfway there.